This is the Dairy Download, brought to you by EverAg Insights and the International Dairy Foods Association, where we offer extra sharp market and policy insights on dairy. I'm your host, Phil Plord.
And I'm your co-host, Kathleen Wolfley.
This episode is all about leadership and succession planning. Our guests are here to tell us about their career journey that led them to leadership positions and how their companies prepare for the next generation of leaders. We'll get to that in a minute. But first, Kathleen, where are we now?
Well, Phil, CME prices as of Friday, April 17th. The block market closed at $1.58 unchanged on the week. The butter market closed at $1.69, down 6 cents, and the CME non-fat market closed at $2.20, 8.5 cents higher on the week. Okay, Phil, what is your most important thing right now?
I know, Kathleen and dear listeners, that we've been down this road before. But, I'd be lying if I said I didn't believe that European milk production is still maybe the most important thing right now. The numbers are still pretty spectacular. Germany, the latest weekly data, plus 6%. Now France has cooled down a little bit to 2%. February production up 5.5% in the Netherlands. A long list of just outside production gains. And what do you know? The forecasts are changing where people are, there's a lot of folks saying, late last year, even 60 days ago, oh, this won't last. And, we'll see a retreat in European milk production. And it probably won't last, we're not going to see 6% forever, but it's lasted longer than people think. And I think it's going to keep lasting. And the fact is, we've not really sent the signal in a clear or strong way to European dairy producers to stop making milk. We saw, generically speaking, prices slip below 40 euros. That was sort of on the line, the profitability line. We never really got hammered beyond that. And in some cases, there's indicators that show that we've bounced back. And so, yes, there's weather. Yes, there's steeper comps. Yes, there's a potential that we're flushing a little early for various reasons. But if the Europeans are going to make milk at a plus 3% clip again, we could find ourselves back into a oversupplied situation. So it's not a new take. I think it's still kind of the right take.
And I think it's a good time to remind the listener that Europe makes 1.6 times more milk than the US and a whole lot more than New Zealand. So what happens in Europe really does have a big impact on the global supply availability of milk. And oh, by the way, US milk production is still very healthy as well. We've got a lot of cows. We'll get a fresh read on milk production next week.
And look, the markets have stayed kind of cleaned up. We did see a demand renaissance beginning late summer, early fall last year. Prices got cheap. People came back to the table. They refilled their cupboards, and that's kind of taken pricing off the bottom. And it's been a pretty impressive we've taken a lot of extra supply and it has gone somewhere. But I think with prices a little higher and the supply still coming, I think that's where the potential challenges loom.
Well, and that's a good lead in, Phil, to my most important thing, consumer strain. And I'm not just talking about U.S. consumers, but global consumers too. We've seen this big run up in the crude oil market. Gas prices in the U.S. are higher, and we're seeing clear data from surveys that have been taken in the last 6 weeks that, consumers are feeling the pinch and they are making adjustments. There was one survey that we saw that said 65% of survey respondents said they're going to pull back on dining out spending because they're putting more in the gas tank. That's in the U.S. But what about the rest of the world where oil prices, energy prices are starting to influence their markets as well? Does that leave less cash in a buyer or a consumer in Southeast Asia's pocket to buy dairy, or in Central America where we've seen this big boom in demand from for U.S. cheese? Does that maybe leave less money available to go get product out of the export market? I don't know, but I do wonder if that could have second half ramifications on this marketplace, especially in a world where we have more supply.
And that just plays right into my stat of the week, which is 47.6. And that was the preliminary April reading of the University of Michigan Consumer Sentiment Survey. That's the lowest reading ever since the survey began in 1978. that takes us through some pretty miserable times. It takes us through the Iran hostage situation in the early 80s. Just speaking of the Iran strain threat and all of this. And so consumers are in a sour mood. Now, we often talk about watch what they do and not what don't listen, don't listen to what they say, watch what they do. And some of the indicators we're watching are holding up better than you would guess. But sour sentiment isn't good for a lot of upside momentum in consumer spending, discretionary spending. We'll see if the summer holiday season is got a downturn to it. Dining out, all those sorts of things. I think we mentioned about the gasoline costs, taking money away from other uses like going out to eat. All those things I think are true, and who knows how this ends. But if in 2, 4, 6 weeks we're still talking about this conflict with Iran and $100 something crude oil, all those things, I don't think it's a good sign. So and the numbers, if you think Americans are glum, the data says we are.
And what's interesting, though, Phil, is that we still have theoretically a K-shaped economy, right? Where you have high income consumers still feeling okay, but the low to middle income consumers maybe not feeling so hot, especially given the affordability of other goods.
One of the surveys we saw in the past week was from SNP, I think was the outfit, and it said, 1/3 of people said that the higher gas prices were creating a serious or major problem for them, but 1/3 of the respondents said it was mattered a little bit or not at all, right? And that speaks, and another third were right in the middle, and that speaks to exactly that K-shaped economy.
I feel like we're doing a good job of feeding off of each other, just like, hey, your idea leading to my idea, because my stat of the week is plus 3.1, which Placer AI data, a favorite reference here on the Dairy Download, fast casual visits in Q1 were up 3.1%. But I will add the caveat that QSR was up only marginally year over year, and full service restaurants were down 1.4% year over year. So as a whole, restaurant traffic did okay in Q1, but fast casual was really where we saw a lot of those feet moving, not necessarily into those big sit down restaurants. The key question now, however, what does April look like? The March data wasn't all that stellar. I think a lot of that growth was maybe more February based, but
yeah, February had very good traffic numbers across all of those segments for reasons I don't quite understand.
Pretty weak base, if I'm not mistaken.
True.
But I do wonder if we'll see a continuation of some slippage in April, just given, again, that pressure on people's finances.
All right, fearless prediction time. What you got?
I was going to make a fearless prediction about the non-fat market, but then I decided I don't want to do that anymore.
Why get your head handed to you in 3 days?
So I'm going to go with milk production. So I'm going to wait a week to get my head handed to me. Milk production. I am going to say that we will see U.S. milk production come in at less than 2.5% year over year. I don't think it'll be much less, but I don't think that we will see milk production over 2.5% year over year. How about you?
I don't want to overstate the influence of the Dairy Download, but I did note that Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent made something of a fearless prediction the other day, and in the spirit of a Phil Plord prediction, it was kind of weak. Treasury, I've been accused of making the weak predictions before. Well, here's what Secretary Bessent said. Talking about gas prices, he said that sometime between June 20 and September 20, we'll see gas prices with a 3 in front of it. Now, we're recording this on Friday, April 17th. Crude oil is under tremendous downside pressure. The straits are open. Who knows how long that lasts, but we could see gasoline with a 3 in front of it next week based on the way things are going today. So I'm going to one-up the Treasury Secretary and say we will see gas prices below $3.50 per gallon national average in that timing. So the latest weekly data was $4.10 or 12 cents per gallon, according to the U.S. Department of Energy. 4.10 to 4.12. Bessent says below 3, so that's all of 13 cents, Scott. Come on. I'm going less than $3.50 between June 20 and September 20.
Somebody should call him and tell him that his predictions are weak sauce.
Some dope on the Dairy Downloads calling you out.
All right, Phil, let's get to our first guest. And I think it's worth noting that this is our last recording from Dairy Forum back in January. So enjoy.
We're live at IDFA Dairy Forum 2026 in Palm Desert, California, and excited to have Bob Sarver drop by the show. Bob is the president and CEO of Great Lakes Cheese, an award-winning premier manufacturer and packager of natural and processed bulk, shredded, and sliced cheese. Let's just put it this way. There's a chance that if you've eaten cheese in America, you've eaten something that Great Lakes has helped produce in one way or another. Bob, welcome to the Dairy Download.
Thank you.
I mentioned Great Lakes Cheese is large and does a lot of stuff. Tell us your perspective on Great Lakes Cheese, a little bit about the company and your team.
Yeah, great organization. We're coming up in a couple of years in our 70th anniversary. Founded by a Swiss immigrant who was just looking for ways to provide for his family and really kind of put in a lot of our culture from the very beginning, starting in 1958, hard work, honesty, and integrity. And from there, it just became, you think about the value add segment, and it's kind of that classic case of realized an opportunity back in the 1950s of this conversion of cheese. People were buying it in blocks and rented a stall in the Cleveland food market, started breaking down blocks of cheddar and Swiss and selling it to families. And from there, it's grown to, we're 9 locations now across the country, 4,700 employee owners. And if you talk to Hans is 95 and he's still with us. It would never imagine in his wildest dreams it became what it is today. And it really started as from humble beginnings, and we keep that kind of core to us as a company. And it's the relationships. It's one of the things we love about the dairy industry. It's one of the things that's great here at Dairy Forum. It's a chance to kind of build those relationships. It's a relationship industry, and we kind of see ourselves as a relationship company with our customers, suppliers, and partners.
You started with Great Lakes Cheese in 2018. You stepped in the CEO role in August of 2024. Talk to us about your path to the CEO chair.
Yeah. Prior to Great Lakes Cheese, I actually worked in an infant nutrition industry, baby formula for Mead Johnson for 14 years. Variety of supply chain operations, procurement, plant leadership roles. And it's actually a small world. I talk about relationships that in this industry and infant formula, but it actually prepared me really well for coming into Great Lakes Cheese. Not direct, but it's a part of the dairy industry. And at one point, I was buying dairy ingredients for infant formula, and then I come over to the cheese side with Great Lakes, and I'm at some of these industry events. And, examples, Doug Wilkie at Valley Queen, he's another CEO. I knew him when he was at Foremost selling ingredients 10 years prior. And so a lot of those same relationships are just on the other side of the coin. But then my time with Great Lakes, Mead Johnson was being purchased by Reckitt Benckiser. And, I'd had a long run there and had conversations with Great Lakes Cheese about potentially coming over, but the timing wasn't right. And finally kind of woke up one day and, conversation with my wife and family. It's like, I think it's time for a move. And it was probably a decision sometimes you question. We were making the move from West Michigan to Cleveland, but it was a chance to really settle down because I really love the culture of the company. And came into Great Lakes Cheese, leveraging supply chain operations. So started out as a director of continuous improvement and then got a plant into my responsibility. Then I took over the entire packaging network a few years later. And then in preparation for potentially succeeding into this role, probably a year prior, took over all of commercial as well. And then almost 18 months ago, had the opportunity, was fortunate from the board and the family to be selected to replace Dan as our CEO. And it's been an exciting 8 years. I think about it, of our 9 plants, when I joined, we were putting Wausau into the ground. So I got to be familiar with that project intimately. Then our Hiram expansion, where we doubled the site of our main location in Hiram, Ohio, and then building in Abilene, Texas. So even in that short period of time, a lot of investment, a lot of commitment back to the company, and getting a chance to be a part of all of that's been exciting.
So talk a little bit about leadership. So you mentioned employee owner. So Great Lakes Cheese is an ESOP.
We are.
How does that factor into leadership, and what things have you learned on your leadership journey, especially since you've landed at Great Lakes?
Oh, we do a lot of things unique in our culture. And a lot of that started with how Hans operated, and it stayed. And I would say things like, we are an ESOP. because Hans truly believed he wanted employees to have a piece of the action, not just the profit sharing of how you did this year, but also let's create value, long-term value, and we should all be rewarded for it. He wanted employees to have a better retirement than they had a working career. And so how do we create a program that allows that? But then it also has this probably secondary benefit that you don't think about up front, but it really ties everybody in, all 4,700 employee owners to the business and thinking like an owner. And we talk about ownership culture and we think about dollars. If you're investing that dollar, would you do it? If it was your dollar, because it is, it's an ESOP. And it's thinking about how you reduce waste. And it's important. We're in private label. And so value to our customers is a key part of that proposition. We have to always provide value to them. We want quality, we want service, but at the right value. And you've got to have a complete organization that's bought into that mindset. And that ownership culture really helps drive that because we're all in this together. And it's something for me that I talk about with leaders coming into our organization. In my 8 years, we've not quite we're just shy of doubling our employee count. So we've had to build ranks from within, but also supplementing from the outside. And for us to do that, it's really been one of the biggest challenges we've had to go through. And in the middle of that, we had COVID, which everybody, struggled with recruiting and turnover and the challenges there. But for us, I think we were able to succeed because we were true to who we are. And you tie into what got you here, what runs your business, your ownership culture, and how do you build the tools for the future that are, honoring that, but also, allow yourself to continue to grow. I think one of the things I'm most proud of that we've been working on in the last couple of years in our leadership journey internally to prepare successors is a leadership competency model. And it wasn't something that was generated top down in our organization. It was actually generated by over 100 employee owners at all levels of the organization participating in. And it's helping define what in our culture and those leadership skills, what makes us go. So we're making sure when we're bringing talent in from the outside, looking for fits, but also developing talent internally of these are the skills and the traits that we need to succeed in our organization.
Can you give me a couple of examples of what those characteristics and traits might be?
Well, it starts with, principles, taking ownership. We're a lean organization, and everybody has to wear a lot of hats. And so you have to take ownership to the task at hand, even if it's outside of your normal job description. And, my team knows this. That's kind of one of the pet peeves I sometimes have. If somebody gives you, well, it's not my job. In our company, wrong answer, right? It's everybody's job. We're all in this together. And nobody's above any sort of task if that's the task that needs to be done. But then it gets into, how do you embrace change? We're in a changing business. We're growing rapidly. How do we deliver the results at the end of the day that we have to deliver? And so for us, it's a tool that helps us prioritize. It helps us strategize, but also identify gaps in our talent bases and how do we develop and close them. But like I said, it's something I'm most proud of. It wasn't top down. It was bottom up, which gives it more sustaining power.
Let's talk a little bit about succession planning. It's something a lot of leaders need to grapple with in order to support the future success of the organization. What does succession planning mean to you, and how do you support the future generation of leaders within Great Lakes Cheese?
It's something we talk about. We have it on an annual calendar, right? Like a lot of companies do, it's succession planning time, and you have a formal process. But that's just 1 month of the year. It's a season. We talk about it a lot year round, and it's tied in a little bit to our leadership competency and growth plans. It's tied into conversations we have with employees earlier in their career, because I think succession planning for many people, it actually starts in those first moments with a job, and sometimes your first job out of college, and learning what are the things you want to do. So what are skill sets versus matches? We're 9 sites, obviously. You can talk to people around relocation opportunities. Are you interested in project work? You kind of try to match up business needs with passions or potential passions. And it's dialogues, because sometimes early in your career, you don't know what's available. And you don't know maybe what interests you, and sometimes maybe what doesn't interest you. But you have to sometimes go through those processes, do those jobs, do those tasks. Maybe it's project work to refine what you like and what you don't like. And so for us, it's a lot of conversations starting early with employees to try to career map, to understand what their passions are. And it's an open dialogue. And I tell employees this all the time. I tell my leadership team this. It's a constant conversation because people have also personal lives. And sometimes the next job isn't up, it's a lateral. And sometimes people are happy in the location they're in. That's what they want to do. But, that work-life balance is a constant communication because it evolves. And so for us, it's around identifying what are our gaps, conversations with employees, when do we think positions are going to open up, but also kind of keeping a pulse with each employee where possible to say, what are your interests? And, I always joke, you never know what our company will look like tomorrow. We could wake up and we have a new project, and that creates opportunities as well for employees.
I would imagine that part of that process and keeping everybody engaged is investment and new things. Great Lakes has innovated over the years in a lot of different ways. What's next? What are you excited about in terms of innovation and growth today?
I think conversation with a lot of counterparts here at Dairy Forum, I think a lot of us are ready to move on from 2025 and are looking forward to 2026. A lot of unique challenges last year. I mean, for us, we've brought online our plant in Franklinville, our latest investment. Plant startups are tough, but we're not the only ones that are in that boat. We've got other suppliers that are bringing up big cheese plants in the last 18 months, and we all kind of commiserate. We're battling the same battles. But, for me, I think there's some interesting data points where we're at in the industry. What's going to happen long-term with GLP-1s? In some ways, it's a headwind, but what's the glass half full of GLP-1? And how do you make sure we're positioning for that? We're always going to be core slices, shreds, and bars in the cheese types you're familiar with. That's our core business, and it'll probably always be that way. But then how do you make sure you're being where the consumer wants it? And it's not just ways in, appetite, but it's also where they want to consume. A GLP-1 consumer is into snacking, smaller meals spaced throughout the day. So how do we invest and make sure we're meeting the snacking space? But then it's also, I think, globally, the next 10 years, the U.S. is positioned to help fill this global cheese dairy demand. And we're the best position between, regulatory environment, infrastructure, climate, and to do it efficiently. And it's something that's exciting.
I got to imagine. So one of the things that we found amusing and fascinating in a useful way this year is all of a sudden you can buy these rotary cheese graters that are really cool.
Yeah.
Right. And all of a sudden you look at it and chunk sales are up and shred sales are down. And then you're like, okay, how long is this going to last? Right. I mean, I imagine that kind of either delights you, gives you fits, or both.
It's been, you think about chunks. This started 3 years ago around Thanksgiving. A TikTok video on mac and cheese was really the
shred your own
tipping point. And we've seen a category, chunks that I don't want to say was dead, but was flat.
Yeah.
It really wasn't growing. And it's been up double digits year on year, all driven by a social media TikTok post. And then that's gotten into the shred your own. It obviously cannibalizes a bit on the shred side, which we've invested heavily in. We haven't felt the impact as much as private labels kind of offset with its growth to offset the headwinds of the shred your own. But, it's brought life into a category that was...
Who knew, right?
Who knew? And I think when I go back to, when we talk about it internally, it's like, for us, I think one of the things we have to involve in is historically private label, we're not advertising, right? We're not front of mind with a consumer awareness. It's not an area we're in. We're not a brand. But that this whole social media thing is a space we have to learn how to operate in. And when you're representing everybody else's brands as private label, how do you do that?
Yeah.
And we've had opportunities, and what we do a lot is partnering with a lot of retailers that are starting to do more social media work around cracker cuts and how you can use that for holiday entertaining and party trays and other formats we have that are available at their stores, and understand how do we meet the consumers where they want to consume cheese.
Well, Bob, we really appreciate you joining us on this live edition of the Dairy Download at Dairy Forum. Appreciate your insights.
Appreciate it. Thanks for having me.
Here's another take on leadership and succession planning. We're excited to welcome Shawna Nelson to the show. In 2025, Shawna became Organic Valley's 4th CEO and first female chief executive officer. Shawna's journey with Organic Valley is incredible. Began back in 2005 as a human resources intern, a true co-op success story, and she's deeply committed to Organic Valley's mission of supporting family farms, delivering high-quality organic food, and championing environmental stewardship. Shawna, thank you so much for joining us on the Dairy Download.
Thank you for having me.
So tell us a little bit about Organic Valley. It's still a relatively young company, exploded on the scene in the past 15, 20 years, and you exploded right along with it. Talk about it.
Absolutely. So Crop Cooperative was founded in 1988 by 7 farmers that had experienced the 1980s farm crisis and knew that family farmers needed a different option. So those farmers that founded our cooperative wanted to make sure that they had an outlook for their families and their futures that included bringing farmers to the table on topics like pay price, policy, and the future goals that they had for themselves. So for our cooperative, they formed a mission that was, how do we create economic stability for the family farm? The Organic Valley brand for Crop Cooperative came after the cooperative was founded. And it was really a lever to achieve that mission, with recognition that farmers and consumers coming together could drive economic stability for the family farm. So today we have about 1,500 organic farmers in 29 states, and we bring the Organic Valley brand to millions of consumers.
So, Shawna, I had the pleasure of listening to a little bit of your story with Organic Valley at IDFA's Women's Summit last week. Tell the audience a little bit more about your story with Organic Valley and what drew you to the cooperative.
Yeah, my story started in 2005. And so I was between my last 2 semesters in college. And I actually grew up in this region, in the Driftless region of Wisconsin, and was familiar with the cooperative, but didn't know a lot about the cooperative. And so I was looking for an internship and decided to put my name in for Organic Valley, interned throughout the year of 2005. And then I moved on to a role in marketing and sales analysis and planning. And that was what I thought I wanted to do, using my business degree and an accounting minor to put it to work using data. So I was working on pricing for all of our customers across the nation, promotions, broker commissions, a lot of data-driven decisions in our marketing and sales area. My next career move with the cooperative was to go back to HR, where I did recruiting, employee relations, safety, compensation for about 10 years. And for anybody who wants to take on a leadership role, I think HR is sometimes that area that we don't exactly know what they do, but you get a lot of experience that's really valuable to people who want to be leaders in the future. I find my HR experience very strategic and very valuable to the career that I drove with the cooperative. My biggest pivot came in 2016. And so I was working in HR, and one of my leaders came up to me and suggested that I move roles within the cooperative. And the role that they suggested to me was a role on our membership team. So moving from what I was an expert in, working with our employees and doing HR functions, to moving over and leading milk hauling, and working directly with our farmers. And so while I look back and say that that was probably the best decision I made in my career, at the time it was quite a bit, that was pretty scary, right? Going from an expert to being absolutely new in what I was doing. But I fell in love with the mission of the cooperative in that role pivot. So as much as I had to lean in and learn a whole bunch of new stuff, I was able to understand what the mission meant to our farmers in a very real way. When you sit across the table from a farmer and hear their story and how they're working to bring the next generation onto that operation, it becomes very real what we're fighting for each and every day.
You know, it sounds counterintuitive, but then at the same time, I mean, HR is about people, right? And helping people get along, getting along with people, and you go from whatever the, you know, how many people on staff at Organic Valley. I understand there's a lot more members, but they're really not that crazily distant concepts, are they?
They're not. I mean, I think business is people, whether it's working with our 830 employees, working with our 1,500 farmers, or working with all of our partners in between. It's really working with people to drive forward results that help us advance our mission. And so I do think that there's a lot of transferable skills, and sometimes we don't necessarily see that at the surface. But when you dig down in, you see, well, those are really applicable things, and the what or the content is really what we learn when we move from one thing to another. And so in my journey, that was really a springboard, because from being director of field operations, I moved to vice president of dairy pool, overseeing all of the farmed plant side pieces of our dairy operations. Then I moved to executive vice president of membership, working with all of our members across all of our pools, and was in that role for about a year and a half before I got my shoulder tapped to be CEO, which is a fun story all on its own, because I didn't know that our CEO was going to give notice. And so all of the things that HR people talk about, succession planning and all of that stuff, becomes really important when somebody moves on and they say, are you ready to be interim? And my answer was yes, and I'd like to be CEO, which was a weekend of interviewing, and then became CEO of Organic Valley. And I actually celebrated 1 year in that role over the weekend. So excited to have my first role under my belt.
Well, congratulations on a year as in the CEO seat. I'm sure that you were celebrating in a little less stressful fashion than a whirlwind of interviews the year before.
Exactly.
Funny, Kathleen, sometimes your boss just decides to take a step back. Have you ever heard of that before? And all of a sudden it's you. I'm not sure that we did great professional development with Kathleen, although, she'll be just fine. But can you talk a little bit about what Organic Valley is doing in that professional development field?
Absolutely. We want our employees to grow and to be able to accomplish whatever career goals that they have for themselves. And so we work through individual development plans for all of our employees. And so I'll just use my example to illustrate what that might look like. It was about 6 years ago that I put CEO on my development plan. And it was okay for me to say that. There was a couple of layers in between me and the CEO role, but it was okay for me to step out and say, that's something that I want to develop my skill set towards. That might be a reality someday and it might not, but I want to make sure that I'm doing the right actions to be able to step into that role should that be an outcome that's possible. And so we use several processes. I alluded to some of these already, but performance reviews, talent reviews, succession planning, to make sure that we're putting the right actions to our high potential leaders. And then we develop training content. So we do a lot in-house. We bring specific topics like crucial conversations to our employees to make sure that we're developing those skills. But we've also developed programs for emerging leaders. So like the individual contributor that wants to move to their first level of management. And we have an executive development cohort that I went through a number of years ago to develop skills to be a senior leader within the cooperative. We also encourage our employees to attend a lot of industry development. And so that was key on my to CEO development path, is making sure that we were plugging into the right things in the industry. So Dairy Forum was something that was key on my list every year to make sure that I was going to. We now identify folks for Next Gen. And so we've had leaders in IDFA's Next Gen leadership program the last several years. And then we had somebody attend Women's Summit last week in Washington, D.C. So all of those help you not only develop skills, but also create those important cross-industry relationships that we need as we aspire to these different roles.
Let's think about the product side of things. What does Organic Valley as a brand think in terms of the future of the dairy industry? What do you think that the organic dairy market is going to look like in 5-10 years?
We see that there can continue to be growth in organic dairy. Consumers care about where their food comes from. And so continuing to make sure that we translate that and bring that to the table for consumers, that we understand how consumers are bringing their dairy in, if that format needs to change, whether it's more snacking or more protein, and make sure that we're connecting those dots for consumers of where the organic industry and the dairy industry overall can meet those consumer preferences.
Okay, Shawna, this is the $1,000,000 question, though. What is your favorite Organic Valley dairy product?
Oh, my favorite Organic Valley dairy product it changed recently.
Oh,
So I used to be a Stringles. Stringles was the easiest answer to what my favorite product was because you can grab a Stringle with you. It's our string cheese and high protein, great snack. Felt good about sending it out the door with my son. Organic Valley Protein Plus might be a very strong contender because
oh.
the taste of it is so good. Um, I have to throw a third one in there too. We have a new American cheese that melts. And so when you're thinking about quesos or nachos, the format of that is just wonderful too. So maybe you expect that from the CEO that I can't pick just one because there's so many good options.
As long as you're finishing on queso type product, we're gonna give you a pass.
Okay, good.
All right. So, what is your advice for younger professionals in the dairy industry who want to follow your path that have just written down CEO on their professional development plan? What lessons have you learned that you'd pass along to those folks?
So I asked a group at Women's Summit last week to do this activity, and I will share it with you all now, which is write down what you want to do and be bold with that because you're not going to accomplish many things if you don't be clear with what you want for yourself. Within that scope, though, share a few thoughts. Work ethic matters. Roll up your sleeves, learn the industry, and don't be afraid of putting the hard work in, right? Like whether it's listening to the Dairy Download to bring in information and helping you develop the skills of knowing what's going on in the industry, to taking on challenging projects within your company, be willing to do the work so that you can achieve that learning, because the learning is really the key piece there. Find a mentor. There's so many knowledgeable people in this industry. Find somebody. I've had several across the years, and I think a good mentor often tells you what you need to hear when you need to hear it, even if it's hard to hear in the moment. And then the final one is build relationships. Make sure that you're going to the different opportunities, whether it's across your organization or across the industry, so that you have that Rolodex of people that you can call on when you run into a situation.
Well, Shawna, we really appreciate you joining us on the Dairy Download and for the Dairy Download call out, of course.
Absolutely.
And thanks for sharing your insights on leadership and on Organic Valley with our listeners.
Thank you.
That's a wrap for today's show. As always, we want to thank our production team, Mariah Minnick, Andrew Jerome, and Jeff Cullen at IDFA, and Abby Bauer over here at EverAg. If you're interested in what Kathleen and I do for our day jobs, check us out at ever.ag. And remember, if you enjoy the show, hit the subscribe button and leave us a review on your favorite podcast platform.
Thanks for listening to the Dairy Download. Until next time, stay sharp.